First time today, I am trying this out. And so, what I'm trying to do here is go live here on my Facebook and my YouTube channel right here, and then Instagram here. Let me give me a second to quickly set this up, and then I'll just get going. And this is just going to be a very informal kind of chat and hopefully a little bit of a dialogue with people. So I'm going to raise this camera up a little bit for my Instagram, just in case there's some comments that come in, I'll be able to see them. And so I'll look primarily at this camera. So I am recording here, coming to you live from sunny, kind of warm, smoky California. I'm in the Bay Area here in San Jose, California, and I'm coming at everybody on a Friday afternoon. I am just be forewarned, I'm having an adult beverage this afternoon just to wind down from the week. I know for most of us, if you're doing social work, any week is a challenge to get through. Sometimes they're more than others. This week feels like one of those weeks for me. And so I am having a little drink here. But I also just wanted to, first of all, test this format and this setup and see if I'm able to go live on a couple of different platforms. But I also, was having a conversation this afternoon with several people about the things that are going on in Wisconsin and things that are just continuing to go on across the country. And we had this continuing discussion about about social workers and the defund the police movement. And so, most of us that were in this conversation, we've really been busy with our work and these California fires that have been going on. We've had a lot of evacuees that we've had to deal with, and depending on where you live, but I know where I live, many of our clients have been impacted by the evacuations that have gone on in California. So we've been dealing a lot with that, and everything else is going on. And those of us that were in this discussion really have not been keeping up with what's been going on with the whole defund the police and add social workers kind of as a replacement for police, that whole scenario and what's been going on with that. So I was just going to take a few minutes here to just talk a little bit about that. And hopefully if there's a way that people are able to post comments, if you have thoughts or information, if you're seeing this live about the defund the police movement and how it impacts social workers, then we can, have a little dialogue on that. So what I initially, when I heard about the defund the police movement, I took it as just what the word said, defund the police, which in my estimation, and even looking into it a little bit, that word, and sometimes I'm a little bit of a stickler for grammar, but the word defund literally means defund, like take away all of the funding. And so that was my initial thought. So initially I thought, and along with that, the comments were, let's put in social workers instead. Well, I don't know how many of you, and if you have had these situations, but I don't know how many of you have been in situations where it is a high level incident. Maybe you're going out to remove a child, or you're dealing with someone under the influence, and it is a dangerous situation. And so, we often, at least in my work, and I'm open to hear what other people have to say about this in the comments here, is my experience is that we go into those situations with police for the most part. When there's a safety, concern, we team with police, and we go in with police to first, as social workers, try to de-escalate, try to do some crisis intervention. But if need be, we have police officers or law enforcement that are responding with us. And so when I heard the defund the police and replace them with social workers, I thought to myself, there's a lot that I can do as a social worker in terms of going into these high level incidents and de-escalating and working with families that maybe don't need law enforcement involvement. But there are definitely situations that myself, or one of the social workers that I supervise, I don't always feel safe sending them into a situation with a clipboard and a pencil alone, because I know there's either been a past history of violence or there's reason to believe that there may be a violent incident. So, those are instances when law enforcement is something that I feel comfortable working with. However, this movement came along with defund the police and send only social workers in. That's what I thought at first. Then I began to hear the discussions and the talk that was more along the lines of, well, we don't really mean completely defund the police. What that means is let's look at how we fund the police and let's divert a lot of that money towards social workers or other people that can intervene or respond in situations where law enforcement may not need to be involved, and actually a better job can be done addressing the needs of that individual by a social worker or some other kind of crisis responder other than law enforcement. And so that then became a little more reasonable to me in terms of just, an option or a new lens of looking at how we deal with things in society. That seemed tenable. And then that seems like something that makes sense, not only anecdotally based on my own experience, or maybe some of you have had experiences in, with a situation like that. But also I think a lot of the data backs that up, is that, when we do send in someone as either prevention or intervention, that is highly trained to do that kind of work, we can have a lot better outcomes both in the immediate and in the long term. Because, when law enforcement gets involved, or even when we get involved to a certain extent as social workers, we don't just impact that individual and that family in that moment. We impact potentially generationally what's going to happen with that family. And so, the discussion about taking another look at how police are funded, how some of that money can go towards funding other, people like social workers to do the work. That is something that I'd like to know more about, and I'd like to be involved in that. So that's kind of where that conversation went for me. But then as the movement continued, I did begin to then hear other people say, no, actually, when we said defund the police, we meant defund the police and like completely just eliminate law enforcement. I could be mistaken on that. If someone can confirm or deny that in comments here somewhere, that would be appreciative, or I would appreciate that. Because like I said, I haven't really had the time to keep up as much as I would like to on this topic. But the last I heard, there were some places that were being completely defunded, or at least it was on the table. So, and that's really, as I started off this conversation here, was that the talk that I had with my colleagues today was that we were kind of wanting to know where we stand currently in this conversation. So I can clearly, obviously, do some research on Google or whatever, and I probably will end up doing that at some point. But I just was interested in putting it out here on social media to the people that will see this live, or people that will see it after the fact, and maybe hear some discussion about how do you feel about not necessarily only the defund the police conversation, but defund the police as it relates to social workers, and what's out there as a proposal or proposals for how we will be integrated. And so I think that, again, as I mentioned, there's certainly which social worker or what professional that does the work that we do is going to turn down the opportunity to get more funding for the work that we do. If there's a conversation about redirecting funds towards the work that we do, I don't know anybody that I work with or have ever worked with that's going to turn that down. However, the balance to that I'm interested in having the discussion about is, do we as a profession feel that overall in society, in terms of just societal work that we do, systems work that we do, social justice efforts that we make, do we believe that complete defunding of all law enforcement is actually in the best interest of the individuals, the communities, the schools, everyone that we work with? I think there's a discussion to be had there. I think, it's a very obviously emotional and charged topic that people feel very, very strongly about one way or another. And, you know, some people, like I think myself, are kind of in the middle. I can see both sides of this. I could see the people who want to who basically say this model has not worked. It has never worked. It's rooted in racism and white supremacy. And, you know, it just needs to go and let's start from scratch. I get that. And I certainly have seen it and lived it both professionally and personally. But I also, you know, on the other hand, I do see the argument that we need a maybe more measured approach where we do acknowledge those concepts of institutional racism and white supremacy and you know, all those factors that people are concerned about, but we address them in a way that is more of a we take a global look at it. We look at the systems instead of that acute need that we seem to see in many law enforcement agencies. And so, again, I think this is an interesting discussion. You know, there's a comment here that we have: mental health professionals are needed sometimes more so instead of police. And I think that does back up kind of what I was saying, is that certainly there are sometimes situations where it's completely inappropriate to have a police or law enforcement intervention, because the situation just doesn't call for it, but also sometimes because those people who are sent out there from law enforcement are not trained to deal with that particular situation in that way. Where if you think about the requirements to be an actual social worker, even a basic entry-level social worker, much less a licensed or a clinical social worker, you think about the requirements that it takes wherever you are, whatever state or country maybe you're in. What are the requirements that it takes for us to do the work that we do? How much training do we get? How much, how many field placements and internships and years of education do we take all to do this job? Versus the training that, unfortunately, that as far as I know, law enforcement gets. It's a small fraction of what the preparation that we as the social work profession get. And so, indeed, I think there are times when it's totally called for to not call police at all or law enforcement, and to send out someone who's prepared to do that work. But like I said, there's definitely training that we don't receive as social workers to de-escalate situations. As I mentioned, I have been in situations, very dangerous situations, gang-related situations, large numbers of people, actual violent things going on. And I've been there with my social worker hat on. I've been there for removals of children, unfortunately, when there's drug and alcohol situations going on. And, it's a very difficult situation to be in if you're just a social worker with a clipboard and a pencil. And so, as I've talked about previously in this discussion, I just really do look forward to a discussion at some point about what really makes sense. Let's get social workers at the table. Let's get the NASW or, other organizations, worldwide social work organizations, and people that are on the ground too, because sometimes the tops of our organizations and our representatives, they do good at what they do sometimes at the high level legislation or policy level, but they also sometimes don't have the most current on the ground realities because they've been removed a little bit sometimes from the work. And so we need to put a lot of people at the table from all these different areas, and let's figure out what would actually work. If that does mean that, law enforcement has to go in certain areas and for whatever reason, then let's make sure that that's backed up by data, by a solid plan B, by something that's going to ensure the safety and well-being of the members of society. If we can come up with a different plan that involves some level of everyone at all different levels, law enforcement, intervention, crisis workers, longer term support social workers, whatever that looks like, let's have that discussion. Let's be thoughtful about this, is my opinion. I as a social worker and as a political representative, I sit on a local government agency board as an elected official. And I think that from that lens, it really does require something this important, requires us to kind of slow down, to be thoughtful. I'm not saying that we don't pay attention to our emotional response, because as social workers, we know that sometimes that gut response is the right response. But also, we do, as social workers, also know that we need to be able to take our emotions, take our initial reactions to things and slow it down, compartmentalize information, assess the situation with a clear, level-headed perspective. And so, again, this is a ongoing discussion, and I bring it up again because I was having the discussion with some colleagues today, and we really didn't know what the current situation was with bringing social workers in as a replacement for police. I don't know if that's still the proposal that people are thinking on the table, or if that's not on the table anymore. I know for a fact, as a social worker and as a political elected official, that as many stories that there are of police officers and law enforcement who act inappropriately, illegally, sometimes lethally, which is ridiculous. I have just as many stories where, there have been law enforcement officers who have responded actually in a way that is helpful to me as a professional, that's helpful to the family, to the individuals being impacted. So it's I think it's unfortunate sometimes, in whatever the situation is, that we paint situations with a very broad brush, and we don't break down the reality sometimes, because again, in the way I approach my work and the things that I do in the community is more often from a perspective of like, let's get all the information, let's feel it, let's have a emotional response. We're human beings, let's feel that, but let's also not jump to conclusions or jump to reactions. I don't typically like to be reactionary in my responses and my decisions. In my estimation, that doesn't serve anyone for the most part well. I think for me, in the way I do things, I do more justice to those that I work for, those that I serve, by thinking things through a little bit. Again, acknowledging the emotion, acknowledging the feeling, but really having a measured approach, because I'm not only looking at addressing the issue in the moment, but also what are the impacts of however I decide to address this, whatever decision I decide to make, action I take, how is that going to impact this person tonight, tomorrow, their kids, their kids, their neighbors? Like these decisions sometimes have wide-reaching impact and sometimes unintended consequences. So that's why I think I don't necessarily lean one way or the other on this right now, but I do, just in general, as a social worker and as just a person, I think that it's valuable to take a moment and take a measured approach, a logical, thoughtful approach to the way we approach the situation. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this off, and my throat's getting a little dry, as you might hear. But I will continue my Friday, but as this video, I guess, will continue on, please make some comments about what you think, or if I'm wrong about anything in the things that you've heard me say. I'd love to take feedback from other social workers, other helping professionals, and get what your perspective is. Also, I know that we have people that follow from, this is kind of uniquely, in some ways, an American, United States phenomenon, although it's not necessarily. I know that globally there's some impact as well, but I would be interested in the perspectives of people outside of the United States, of the news, of how we're approaching this law enforcement, social worker situation. So on that note, I think mission accomplished for me here. I did figure out that I think I can go live on my Instagram and Facebook to some degree pretty successfully. I've had some comments here, some insightful comments come in through Facebook. I didn't see any through Instagram this time around, but I know other times that I've gone live, there's plenty. So it looks like it'll work out going forward, and I'll hopefully do some more of these. Again, my goal is to try to just engage in conversation and have us learn from each other as social workers and helping professionals. So that being said, everyone have a great weekend. I'm going to continue having my beverage and maybe look into a little bit more recent facts about defund the police and the impact on social workers. And maybe I'll do another talk once I'm a little more informed on this topic. But anyway, have a good weekend, everyone. And I'm going to cut it off here. See you all later.